Welcome to the CCN podcast, where we discuss the latest trends, companies, and people shaping the cryptocurrency space. I'm your host, Jake Sylvester. Hey, how's it going, everybody? We're here in Portland at TruffleCon with the founder of Truffle Framework. How are you?
Doing great.
Yeah, so go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, I'm Tim Coulter. I created Truffle way back in April of 2015. It was a tool that I needed at the time, and now it's turned into the most popular Ethereum framework.
Yeah, so talk through how you created the tool and why you felt the need to create this new framework.
So when I came onto Consensus, I needed to figure out, like I was told that Ethereum is this new platform that you can build applications on, but I needed to figure out how to do that. And at the time, all you had was a compiler that turns your code into code the computer can run, and then you had a library that allowed you to talk to the Ethereum network. Beyond that, there was nothing about how to build the whole application itself. So what I did is I went through every step, and effectively, imagine you're creating this big old list. You have to do this, then you have to do this, then you have to do this, and then once you've done all of those things, you finally have an application you can use. Well, I wanted to make that process repeatable for myself, because as developers, you don't want to do everything by hand all the time. And so released, packaged all those scripts that I wrote up as a single tool, and that's how Truffle was born.
So when you started making these scripts, was it meant to be a framework, or was this just something to make your life easier?
No, actually, I looked it up recently, and I found the first Slack message that I sent to somebody, and like, here, check out this script that I wrote. This is how you deploy to the Ethereum network. And it really just came out of the need to have something.
Yeah, absolutely. And talk a little bit about how the community took it, how they ran with it, and how it went from this kind of internal tool for you and some people at Consensus to this whole framework where now we're at a conference in Portland.
Yeah. So we really embraced open source. When I released it, I had only been at Consensus for 2 months. I mean, it just packaged things up, and here, this is what I did. The Truffle at the time represented my processes and the things that I liked to do. What I realized quickly is that other people did things differently. Like, they wanted either the steps that I had didn't quite work for their process, or they were building a different type of application that had different constraints. And so just the simple fact of releasing it out to the world and telling people that it's there brought people in. They saw the code. They said, oh, I could help. I could change this. I can contribute. And it kind of, for lack of a better word, snowballed. And so we learned a lot from the multiple versions of Truffle. Every version, every major version, represents a change in the way that we do things and the way that Truffle works. We use those big numbers to say, like, hey, we're breaking things, and what that really means for developers is you should stop doing it this way and do it this way. This is better. So there's been a lot of learning over time, a lot of improvements, and what we've seen is that work has brought the community together and brought them to something like this.
Yeah, so talk about some of the most important concepts in the framework for some people that maybe aren't as familiar with Truffle.
Yeah, so if you have not used Truffle, you are asking for a bit more pain. Creating an application on Ethereum, as I mentioned, takes all of these steps, and you have to kind of roll your own. So there are things, for instance, you're just compiling your code, you have to figure out how to get that onto the network, and then you have to figure out, even after you get a contract on the network, get the code there, you have to tell an application how to use that code, like where it lives. Like, that's something that never existed in previous environments. Like, this is where your code lives, and if you don't know that location, you can't run it. So some of the basics are compiling your code and writing it, deploying it to the network. After deploying it, managing those artifacts, writing an application that uses the outputs of the deployment to integrate with the network, and then finally releasing your full application. So those are the basic workflows. Beyond that, there are debugging workflows where if your code fails, you can step through and see how it works, see where the error is. There are workflows around publishing to a package manager, using code that other people used, and just more advanced build steps and development processes. Oh, and there's one thing that I completely forgot to mention, which is so integral, is actually testing your contracts. At the time when I created Ethereum, there's literally no way to write automated tests for the code that you're writing, and that's something that exists in every other development environment. Yeah,
so one of the things I thought was interesting, and I'll just bring it up because the test framework Mocha, is how you came up with the name Truffle.
So you're right. At the time, those original scripts that I mentioned, the one that I sent to my coworker, it was written in CoffeeScript, which is an offshoot of JavaScript, and CoffeeScript was nice at the time because it made things a bit cleaner, but JavaScript's really nice now. Anyway, so there was CoffeeScript, and then there was in JavaScript, so you have that name, and then Mocha's the testing framework that Truffle used, and I even was using a plugin for Mocha called Chai. And so I'm thinking okay, what is this experience that I'm in? I'm in this experience with a coffee or a nice cup of tea or whatever it is. And I'm like, well, what just goes good? And I don't know if you've been to some coffee shops, some of the more boutique coffee shops, they'll hand you a cup of coffee and there's usually something on the side. Maybe it's a piece of chocolate. I want it home. It's a little piece of candy. I'm like, well, why don't we name it Truffle or something like that? And so I looked online and on the NPM package manager, and the name was available, and we took it from there. It turns out to be really beautiful branding. No other development that I know of development environment, that I know of, tries to evoke this feeling of pleasure, I guess, while developing your application, and that's really what we're trying to do, is make it a good experience.
Yeah, and I think having a good experience there is so important because for a lot of developers, this is the first introduction to Ethereum. So talk through some of the pressure there and how you make that a smooth experience.
Yeah, it really comes out of just learning over time. So again, I told you the original scripts that I wrote are what I needed, but people told me that we need to fix this, we need to fix this. If you saw David Brella's talk on the main stage the first day of TruffleCon, his talk was, here's what Truffle's good at, and then here's a pain point, and then here's another pain point, and here's another pain point. And there's absolutely no way that our team could have made a tool that solves more people's problems without people coming to us and saying, here's the issues I'm actually having. The great thing is that we're in this position as developers of the tools to really figure out what people need. So sometimes they tell us, and other times we have to go on our own, look at what exists in other development environments, and sometimes make some guesses and see if this is how we think will be the best way to solve the problem. Release it really fast, get that feedback, and then go from there.
And one of the other interesting things I think about this is it's a completely new paradigm, right? So before this interview, we were talking about going from PHP to Node.js. And you said, why do I have to do a promise and then .then? It's just not intuitive.
Yeah.
So have you been finding any of those async await type things in Truffle that should be obvious, but you just haven't seen yet in our pain points?
Yeah, async await specifically, there are some language barriers. Async await specifically, without it, you would have to, like you said, use promises and write so much code. Truffle started in JavaScript or CoffeeScript in JavaScript because that's where my strong suit was, and I really liked it. It was also the major library at the time. Web3 was written in JavaScript, and so I wanted to integrate. What this has turned into is actual like JavaScript has become the language where you really write once, run anywhere. Like that's what Java wanted to be, but JavaScript has become that. So what we're seeing is we can take all of our code, literally everything that we write, even Ganache, so like the core of this Ethereum virtual machine, and put that in the browser, in the command line, in a nice UI desktop environment. We found it to be very powerful. So yes, there are some issues that we find, but the great thing is that JavaScript is evolving, and those are kind of those issues are kind of resolving themselves.
So one of the things I'm kind of curious about is we've seen this huge trend over the last couple of years of everything being turned into JavaScript.
Yeah.
So React Native now, Electron,
yeah.
all these applications that you used to write in C, Java, all these other languages turning into JavaScript.
Yeah.
And so with the emergence of flow typing, TypeScript, and some of the more strongly typed JavaScript, do you see a future where we're transpiling JavaScript into Solidity?
That's a really good question. That depends on whether or not Solidity becomes the main language. And not only that, whether we, I don't want to say the main language, but stays the main language. It currently is the main language for Ethereum. Whether or not we support multiple languages. Some things that we're doing now is, for instance, integrating EWASM, so the Ethereum WebAssembly. And that is it's not a language, but it's the like core bytecode that can be compiled down from virtually any language. If we support EWASM and Truffle, then we're going to start seeing smart contracts written in a bunch of other languages, including Rust, Ruby, potentially PHP or C or C#. We could potentially compile JavaScript down to Solidity, but some of the work we're doing is adding other languages to be first-class citizens, just like Solidity.
Oh, okay. So rather than transpiling into Solidity, compiling down.
Yep. Yeah.
That's an interesting change. And I think one of the interesting things about Solidity, too, is computing power is once again expensive.
Yep.
So, for instance, we were talking earlier about package managers, right? Solidity really doesn't have one yet because it's not like NPM where you don't have to worry about chaining together 2,500 packages.
Yeah.
So talk through some of the challenges around that and how you think they're going to be resolved with Truffle.
Yeah, so we created the first package manager for Ethereum, FPM. We worked with Piper Miriam from the Ethereum Foundation. And there are some issues in creating a package manager on top of Ethereum. If you're creating a package manager for anything else, you have a hosted server and you just publish packages. You have a database that stores the names of those packages and the versions and takes care of all that, and you're done. Generally, with that, you are releasing code. You're straight up releasing code. What we find with the Ethereum package managers, you may not. So, although we love public Ethereum and we love open source and we think everybody should give their code out there and let people use it, there are people who want to keep the code private and, for instance, only release the bytecode that gets sent out. So we have to think about different types of packages that don't exist in previous package managers, and then we also have to figure out like how this applies to Ethereum. So if I were to release a package on NPM, I literally just type npm publish and it's done. It doesn't cost me anything. It just happens. It uploads and everything's taken care of. But if you are putting a package on Ethereum, it's going to be managed by Ethereum, and suddenly every package that I release has to be paid for. I have to pay, whether it's a couple dollars or whatever the transaction cost, in order to make that happen. So that's a barrier to entry potentially, and we're going to see how the community adopts that. We also had an issue with the first version of FPM where the service that stored the packages wasn't stable. So to step back for a second, the Ethereum blockchain would be the registry of these are the packages that exist, but the actual code and everything has to be stored on a different service somewhere. This different service was supposed to be globally accessible, but it was starting to lose data. So we are in version 2, which is what we're working on now, we are opening that up a bit, allowing you to choose the storage mechanism, still using cryptography to make sure that everything is correct and you're getting the package that you're meant to receive, but hopefully remove those stability issues and make the whole thing easier for people to use.
Yeah, and I guess you can't just put it on GitHub because that goes against the decentralized philosophy.
A little bit, yeah. Although you might just be able to. So the only requirement we're making, previously we required a very specific storage mechanism, but the only requirement we're making for this next version is a content addressable URL. So, but you could potentially use GitHub and it would be like github.com/your organization/the repository, and then a hash. And that hash is what's important. That hash represents all of the data that's inside the package. And if the data that's downloaded is hashed and we get the same hash back, then we know it's good. So it could come from GitHub, could be stored on your own server or something else, but that hash ensures that you're getting what you expect.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting too. I think GitHub and Git is one of most developers' first introduction to the idea of a Markov chain.
Yeah.
And hashing in general.
Yep. You deal with a lot of like 0x something throughout your whole experience. Not to plug Ganache too much, but one of our next version, the next version of Ganache, our slogan is less hex, more text. So we're gonna make that whole experience better.
Yeah, Ganache is a brilliant experience coming from running a command line client and.
Yeah, the blockchain is, as much as we try to make the whole experience better, the blockchain is kind of a black box, and Ganache opens that up and shows you what's happening while you're developing.
Yeah, so you guys also have a UI framework. Talk through your thinking behind designing that, because a lot of people, when they think about Ethereum, they're not thinking about a JavaScript front-end framework.
Yeah. So I'll step back for a second and go to Truffle 1.0. Truffle 1.0 is very prescriptive. It literally said you had to run your contracts this way. You had to then take those artifacts and write your front-end application this way, and it only allowed for a web application. We realized very soon after that, people were creating different types of applications, and on the front end, they wanted to use so many different libraries or a different tool to package it up. So we completely ripped the suite apart and said Truffle's only going to focus on the contracts and that whole workflow. But we still need to answer the other side. How do you create an application that interacts with your contracts once they're on the blockchain? So we had a library before Drizzle called Truffle-Contract, and that's the same library that you use when you're writing your migration scripts to deploy or writing your tests. Excuse me. But it still didn't quite solve the issues people had. What we noticed when developers were creating these applications is that they spent a lot of time writing boilerplate code to connect to the Ethereum network, to just understand the state of where their contracts are in, what value this certain variable is, and then interacting, just the back and forth interacting with the blockchain. Drizzle takes care of that for you, and it plugs into your favorite front-end frameworks. So although Drizzle is most used in React, and we have a Drizzle React plugin, the actual core of it can be put into Vue, it could be put into Angular, and it will provide that state to you however you need it. And so what this means as a developer is the blockchain is there for you in the front end, and you just need to go pull it and build the web application just as you normally would.
Yeah, it definitely lowers the barrier to entry a lot. And talk through some of the traction, some of the cool dApps you've seen utilizing this framework you built.
Yeah, Drizzle is pretty new. So we're talking Drizzle specifically. I think there are a few using it, but Truffle itself is used nearly everywhere. So we had a big announcement at TruffleCon yesterday, and Brandon Arbanagi from Gemini said they built a stable coin using it. So literally, this is the stable coin that's going to power Gemini's exchange products and financial products, and like that's incredibly humbling actually that our tools are being used in this really high impact production environment. We have worked very closely with Colony. Colony was one of the sponsors of TruffleCon. They have been using Truffle since day one. They are building a decentralized autonomous organization and ways to create your own DAO. And they have been using Truffle. They have been extending Truffle and adding on to it, so it's great having them here. Another one I like to say is Shapeshift. Shapeshift created a what's the word? A asset management platform, so you can invest in or purchase. I won't say invest. You can purchase a lot of different cryptocurrencies, and they will manage that for you. I forget if they do rebalancing. I think it's currently in beta, but regardless, they used Truffle to build that, and that was incredible to see. So, for instance, Colony has been really influential in Truffle 5. We talked to them and figured out what their issues were, and that's they're helping to make Truffle 5 a reality. Shapeshift really helped with Truffle 4. What we like to do is choose specific VIPs to kind of really tell us what they need. So.
Yeah, so where do you see Truffle going over the next 5 years?
That's a great question. So we've had, as I said on stage, we see ourselves taking two tracks. We have to bring the Ethereum development environment back from the 1970s, basically. So all the stuff you expect to be there, like package management, debugging, we need to bring it up to the future, and that's part of what we have to do. We also have to figure out what that means for Ethereum and how Ethereum is different, or how the blockchain is different. So first off, there's a lot of work we need to do in just the basics, in just giving you the information that you need. We're just finishing up debugging, but even then, I just heard that even though our debugger is amazing, some people are they don't really like using the command line. So we're going to integrate that with Visual Studio Code, so you can use the debugger and debug your applications, but click a couple buttons and you're suddenly seeing this without moving back and forth. We're working with Microsoft. They are helping us build a plugin for Visual Studio Code that integrates the whole suite. We are taking Ganache and having less text, more text, like having it provide more useful information so that you actually know what's going on. And then we are currently building Drizzle and making that whole experience better for users, and we're working to focus on that. Those provide the basic things that developers need and really make the experience better. But that doesn't really address the longer term future. The longer term future right now is we think in the enterprise environment. So we are. And I will couch that. So we are in where the blockchain and distributed ledger technology ecosystem is kind of where the internet was in its infancy. We have this really powerful platform that has a lot of potential, but it's not going to be mainstream until enterprises and companies really adopt it. And what we're seeing is that these companies are doing the same things that they did in the early years of the internet, and saying, well, okay, we like this technology, but we're just going to keep it in-house. Like, we're just going to try it out and put our foot in the water and work with it there, and then we'll see what it can become. Personally, if you were to ask me about the long-term future, maybe where my bet is, I think Ethereum is going to be. We're going to have a future where Ethereum is at the center of the blockchain world and mediating the public blockchain, but we might have other private blockchains kind of attached to it, and we'll see a world of Exactly, a world of side chains, and that's how we might interact. And that's, I mean, if you look at the internet, that's kind of how it works now. Like if you work at a company, there's definitely an intranet, but that is also connected to the internet, and there's a very clear distinction between those. What we're doing for Truffle is we're going to make sure that Truffle's at the head of every development stack for all of those chains.
Awesome. Well, it was great talking to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be here.
The views and opinions expressed on this show are only those of its hosts and guests, and sometimes of no one at all. The CCN podcast was produced by Rockwood Audio and hosted by ccn.com. To find out more about CCN and the podcast, check us out at ccn.com. You can also follow us on Twitter at CryptoCoinsNews. If you enjoyed the show, please be sure to rate and subscribe.